We were told nothing about the treatment. All we knew is that he was going to sleep for 3 weeks, and it was just going to give his brain a rest, and that's all we knew. We didn't know about shock treatment. We knew nothing.
These people's lives have been wrecked, and not only that, they were fraudulently told that they were suffering from a mental illness, when in fact they were suffering the damage from a very dangerous and unorthodox treatment.
I think they were just using forms of experimentation where they really didn't know what they were doing there. There was no real overseas evidence that what they were doing would be successful, and they were just playing with people's lives.
This is the story of one of the darkest episodes in the history of psychiatry. It's a story of medical experimentation and fraud which led to the suffering of hundreds of innocent, vulnerable people over a period of 15 years. It's also a story of official incompetence and cover-up which enabled such a scandal to continue for so long without anything being done to stop it. This story of horror unfolded in the most unlikely setting of a quiet, leafy suburb in Sydney, Australia. Pennant Hills, 15 miles from the centre of Sydney, is the location for a small private hospital called Chelmsford. Typical of a kind of small-scale local facility in which a private psychiatrist would place a patient for observation or a short period of treatment, because although Australia has a national health service, there's also a tradition of patients being referred by their GPs to private specialist doctors, often paid for by health insurance. In the 60s and 70s, hundreds of people suffering from mental distress came to Chelmsford to get help. Barry Hart was a model and actor with a promising career ahead of him, but in 1973 he had an eye operation which was bungled by the surgeon, and Hart became depressed by the results. So he was referred by his doctor to a psychiatrist, Dr. John Heron. Dr. Heron advised him to take a few days' rest in the hospital under his supervision. So Barry Hart caught a cab to Chelmsford.
Well, I remember walking in to the ward. I was very nervous, and I saw a man in a bed sitting right here. He had all his head was shaved. He had all scars over his scalp, and I thought, and he actually looked like something from a concentration camp. And I looked away quickly and across the ward, and there was a man in a bed here. Or when I say a man, he was only looked about 19 or 18, and he was very pale. In fact, his face was almost the colour of the pillow. And all his hair was lank, and he looked like he was like a rag doll. And he looked like he was completely drunk and like a rag doll. And I started to feel very uneasy because when I came through the entrance, they asked me to sign a form which gave permission to give shock treatment, which I refused to sign. And I thought, Christ, what's this place? The nurse came up to me and he said, "Do you feel nervous?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, take this, it'll settle you down." And I thought it was something like a Valium or something. So on that faith, I took this tablet, and that's the last thing I can remember. I remember her voice seemed to trail off, and someone saying, "You shouldn't be doing that." I don't know what that was, and The next thing I can remember was that everything was completely black. It was if I had no body, but I had a mind, and I couldn't feel anything. It was like, and there was two beams of white light, and they were coming across and meeting in the middle of my head, and then exploding. Next thing I remember, I had these tremendous pains in my shoulders, and I couldn't stop the ache and the pain, and I tried to move my arms to alleviate the pain, and my arms were strapped, and I went berserk. I said, get these things off of me, and I remember screaming, and then everything went black again, and I remember people screaming and voices, and I remember a girl saying, pray for me, and I remember praying in this darkened place. And there's this Chinese wardsman sitting on the side of the bed. And I asked him what day it was, and the day he said it made no sense. And I told him I had these tremendous pains in my chest, and he said, oh, you've been sedated for 2 weeks. And then I started vomiting blood, and my legs started to swell, and the pain was excruciating. It was like someone had a knife and was twisting into your ribs. I was shipped up to Hornsby Hospital, where I spent 2 weeks in Hornsby with double pneumonia, pleurisy, deep vein thrombosis, a pulmonary embolism, and anoxic-type brain damage.
Barry Hart's treatment at Chelmsford, from which he nearly died, was called deep sleep.
Deep sleep treatment, lasting between 1 and 3 months. Every available method is used here, all at the same time. A large dose of Largactil, a tranquilizing drug, and a smaller dose of sedatives. Drugs of the Nardil group for phobias, and of the tricyclic group for depression. And in addition, up to 20 electric shocks.
This was St Thomas's Hospital in London in the 1960s, where, in contrast, the treatment was being safely practiced by its leading advocate, Dr. William Sargent. The central figure in this story, Dr. Harry Bailey, was a powerful and dynamic Sydney psychiatrist who visited London in the late 50s and was impressed by Dr. Sargent and his techniques. Bailey was the kind of doctor who glossed over his lack of experience with skillful name-dropping and showbiz flair. In spite of his lack of relevant qualifications, in the early 60s he persuaded the government to put £1 million into a new brain research unit with Bailey as director. Then in 1963, Bailey reverted to private practice and began using his own form of deep sleep treatment, adapted from Dr. Sargent's techniques, using Chelmsford Hospital for his patients.
Dr. Bailey saw it very much as his own hospital, although he had no financial interest in it. And he saw his cures as being the great answer to just about every mental illness. And with the force of his personality, he gathered around him people who did believe in him, both medical people and nursing staff, but also a large personal following of patients. And he was a very high-profile, very